All right, welcome to our Solid Security Setup Clinic for April 22nd, 2025. I'm David Johnson, in for the illustrious Nathan Ingram. Nathan is traveling this week. He's headed to Phoenix, Arizona, where he's attending PressConf. And so that's a fantastic WordPress event. Looking forward to hearing all about that when he gets back. Today, we're going to walk through the setup of Solid Security. And we're going to start with Solid Security Pro today as our way to begin, but we will be talking about the differences between Solid Security Basic and Solid Security Pro. If you're not familiar, Solid Security is available in the WordPress.org plugin repository. You can find it there. Just search for Solid Security, and you can install it for free on as many sites as you wish. And today I'm going to show you a couple of really cool tricks, a couple of things that you may not know about that you can do with the Solid Security Basic version in combination with Solid Central. I'm going to let you in on a little hack that you may or may not be aware of, especially if you're not using Solid Central. If you've never heard of Central, we're going to show it to you a little bit today, just very briefly, but we'll give you a way that you can keep an eye on multiple sites' security at once without having to go log into each and every site where you have Solid Security set up. So we're going to look at that together. And I mentioned this before we started the event officially, but if you do have questions, I'd like to invite you to please use the Q&A box. Enter any questions you have in there. I will kind of keep an eye on that during the event. I may not be able to watch the chat as closely, but if you have a question that's related to anything that I'm showing, go ahead and drop it in the Q&A if it's something that I happen to see, and we can tackle it right there in the relevant spot. We'll do that. Otherwise, we do have a dedicated Q&A time slot later in our time together. So we'll make sure to get to all the questions that we haven't answered yet at that time. So I'm going to go ahead and give you a quick idea of what we're going to cover. We're going to walk through the Solid Security Pro setup, and along the way, we're going to cover some key security concepts. And I'm going to especially, oops, this says e-commerce considerations. Y'all, please ignore number 3. I forgot to delete that out of the, modified this from the last slide. We might talk a little bit about e-commerce, but we're gonna focus on Solid Security Pro for general purposes. And then we'll talk about the difference between Basic versus Pro, and where you might encounter some differences, especially during the setup process. But of course, we'll also talk about all the great security features that you get in both products. So this will give you some reason to understand why you may or may not want to use Pro, and whether it's worth it for you to upgrade in your situation or not. And it's not always the right answer for everybody. So happy to talk about those differences. And then, of course, like I said, we'll take some Q&A. Deborah, I didn't get slides ready to download. I appreciate you asking. I will make the slides available a little bit later. So I apologize. I don't have a download link ready for you just yet, but we will get these available. There's not a ton in the slides anyway, so you may or may not really find it all that useful, but I will happily make those available for you. And I appreciate you asking about that. All right, so I've talked about this before. If you've been on one of our Solid Security Setup clinics, you've already heard me talk about the happy path. I've actually talked about this in some other contexts before as well. So this is a term that I stole. I don't know if he originated it or if he stole it from someone, but I will credit Ben Meredith, the illustrious Ben Meredith, who is a director of customer support here at Stellar WP. He's responsible not just for the Solid WP support team, but also for other support teams across other brands, including Give WP and Cadence. So Ben loves to talk about when we create documentation or when we're rolling out a new feature that we create for people. What is the happy path? What's the way that we absolutely recommend that you set up or use that product or that feature? And so that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to walk you through how that works. And to do that, I'm gonna switch over real quickly, and I'm gonna show you something very new, and that is a brand new thing called Stellar Sites. So this is a first public glimpse at Stellar Sites. We're gonna do a full demonstration of how Stellar Sites works and what it is later this week. But I'm going to launch from Stellar Sites, and I'm going to show you a little bit about Solid Security, and this is why we're covering Pro today, actually. I spun up a site using Stellar Sites earlier, and again, we'll talk about it in more detail on Thursday. We'll show you exactly how that process works. I used a fantastic new solution that we have for hosting and running and maintaining WordPress sites and building WordPress sites, in fact. And I walked through an AI questionnaire just a little bit earlier today to create a site. Now, this is just whimsical. It's called the Coffee Stained Beard. And you can use your imagination as to why that might have been on my mind today. So This is Stellar Sites interface, and I've got a site set up in my Stellar Sites account here, which is kind of a demo for today's purposes. And what you'll see here is that it's got the URL for the site. And one of the beautiful things about the way that Stellar Sites works is that it's everything all in one. So you have your hosting, and you have a WordPress site, of course, and you also have a nice selection of plugins and everything already configured. So when I open the site for the first time, um, I will not have touched it yet. So this is going to be a very brand new install. And so I'm going to show you how that looks. Now, this is Solid Central. If you're a Solid user, you've seen this before. I've only got one site connected to my Solid Central account today because it's a brand new Solid Central account that was all set up for the purposes of our demo today. But you can see that this site, which is the temporary URL, majorfieldlettuce.stellarwp.site, is associated with the coffee stain beard. I haven't pointed a real domain at it, and I probably won't. I'm probably destroy this after the demo. But that site's temporary URL is already set up here in Central, and it's connected. And you can see that I can check to see if there's any software updates available. There are none. And I can also take a look at vulnerable software that might exist on this site. So that's a fun capability that exists in Solid Central. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a little bit. Here's the front end of the site. Again, this is all done by AI. I have to give a lot of credit to the folks at Cadence, who not only built this template, and by the way, I was given a number of templates to choose from, but they also did a lot. They have done so much over the last year plus with respect to how you can use tools to build a site quickly. So this literally took, I don't know, 10 minutes to spin up a site that was related to the coffee stained beard. And when I show you WordPress here, I am signed in to WP Admin. And I got here just to show you how that worked by clicking the login button right here from Stellar Sites. So it dropped me right into what we're calling Site Assist. And you may have seen some version of this before. The Cadence team did a fantastic job on this, but this is where you land when you first set up a site with Stellar Sites. And you'll see that I've used the AI system to get the starter site going. That was all during the process. Before I even checked out with my purchase today. But then you'll see it's going to walk me through all the things. And these are things that you might remember to do, or you might forget to do when you're setting up a new site. So we've got all the basics, like setting up your title and tagline and icons and logos and setting a language and time zone and all that stuff. So it's made some intuitive guesses here for me, which is great. Then another thing that we all need to do and sometimes don't remember to do is setting up an SMTP plugin so that we can get an email delivered to us as admins, and then of course to users if they register or if we need to send them password resets and all that sort of stuff. And then we have the site security setup. Now, one of the beautiful things about Stellar Sites is that Solid Security Pro is included with every Stellar Sites plan. So that's why I'm launching off today with a Solid Security Pro installation. And you'll see that the plugin is already installed. And in fact, it's already been licensed to my SolidWP user account. And it's waiting for me to click the setup button. So I'm going to click setup right here. And that's going to drop me into the Solid Security Pro setup screen. If you've ever installed Solid Security Basic or Pro, you've seen this screen. It's identical in both. And this is where we are going to tell Solid Security Pro what kind of site we have. Now, at the moment, the Stellar Sites system doesn't yet talk to Solid Security Pro at the level that it would already have an answer to this question. The truth is, we already know the answer to this question because I've answered it already in another form when I was doing the Stellar Sites setup. But as of right now, and this is true, anytime you install Solid Security Pro on a site, you're going to be asked a question first. And I'll talk real quickly about what these choices mean. The main reason we ask you right now what kind of site you run, is it an e-commerce site? Are you accepting donations down here? Are you just running a blog? Maybe it's a brochure, or maybe you're using it to showcase stuff, is because we really want to know about your users. We're really trying to understand how we're going to need to set up a few components of how security is configured for this site later. And so the answer to the question right now will change some of the questions you get asked later. For example, if I said, this is an e-commerce site, then later Solid Security is going to give me an opportunity to set up some custom security parameters for those folks who are not administrators but might have a user account on the site because they're customers. Maybe they want to log in and see their order history. Maybe they want to update any kind of recurring order that they might have. Similarly, nonprofits, if you have donors and you want to allow your donors to log in and see their donation history or update their recurring donations, similar idea. So we're gonna drive some of the questions that come a little bit later based upon what you answer here. Now, I set this site up as a lifestyle blog, but with the idea that I might sell some products later. So I'm going to go ahead and tell it that it's e-commerce. And you'll see how that affects things in just a moment. And so next we have an important key step before we configure solid security. And this happens again on Basic or Pro. We're going to scan the site to see if there are any vulnerabilities. And we're specifically referring to vulnerable software here. I'm going to tell it to go ahead and scan now, but you'll notice that it's telling me that, hey, we're going to scan your store. So it knows that I'm running an e-commerce site. So I'll click Scan Site. And what's happening right now is it's comparing WordPress core, it's comparing the theme and any plugins that we have installed to a database of known vulnerabilities. And that database is powered by PatchStack. We're going to be talking a little bit more about PatchStack a little bit later. They are the leading threat intelligence provider for WordPress. In fact, I think they are currently ranked number 3, or they're in the top 5 for all CVE reports. They are a CNA, which means that they have the ability to assign CVEs. That's the system that the industry uses to identify vulnerabilities. They're licensed to do that, and they are responsible. They and their team of researchers and the bug bounty program that they operate are responsible for identifying more vulnerabilities in the WordPress space than anyone else. And that's why we chose to partner with them. Actually, at the time that we partnered with them, they weren't that far ahead in the race as they are now, but we could identify back then that that's where they were going, and they have in fact proven that. They're a fantastic organization. And a lot of times they know about vulnerable software even before anybody else does, because they pay bug bounties to researchers who find and report and responsibly disclose vulnerabilities. The PatchTech team is able to understand what's vulnerable before often many others do, and even before those vulnerabilities are disclosed publicly. Now, you may or may not see that vulnerability show up if there were a vulnerability in a scan like this right at this moment. But one of the things that they do is, for our Solid Security Pro customers, PatchStack delivers patches that will protect your site from any vulnerabilities being exploited that are identified during a scan like this one. So I want to just point out, we run that scan first. If it had found vulnerable software, it would tell me right now. And if you do this on your own site and you see like 1, 2, or 5, or 10 vulnerabilities right now, I want to encourage you. We're going to remind you a little bit later about them. So you don't need to just, freak out and panic and go, hey, I got to go resolve all these vulnerabilities right now, because two things are going to happen. One is, if you're using Solid Security Pro, we've already patched them for you. We haven't updated any software yet, but you're getting a virtual patch, and that's delivered from the folks at PatchStack. And so you're actually protected as long as there's a virtual patch for those vulnerabilities. You'll be already protected immediately. But also, we're just going to remind you at the end of the setup process so that you have a chance to go deal with them, because we have some important things to set up right now. So, and again, I want to just remind you, if you have questions along the way, go ahead and drop them in the Q&A box, and I will watch for those, and then we'll tackle them either as we go or later in the Q&A section. So, once we run this scan and report any vulnerabilities, or as now, I've got great news: no vulnerable software on this site, which I always love to see, especially since I just set it up. The next thing we're going to do is set up brute force protection. And this is probably a familiar concept. I'm going to briefly explain the idea behind it quickly so that you have some sense of what it's all about. And then we'll talk about the difference between local and network brute force protection here. So brute force protection is part of the Solid Security firewall. And we want to let you know right away, and it's one of the reasons we have this early in the process, that there is a firewall with Solid Security. It is not the performance draining, massive behemoth firewall that some other solutions offer that try to protect you from every potential what is sometimes referred to as internet background radiation, all these old exploits that no one actually is vulnerable to anymore. We're not trying to do that. In fact, this firewall is very specific. It only does a few key things. One is it gives you a lot of flexibility. If you want to empower it to do more, you certainly can. But one of the first and most important things that it does is protect you from brute force attempts. And you've probably seen this before. This is one of the reasons why we all need strong passwords. And that is that someone, if they really wanted to break into your site, could start guessing passwords. But of course, efficient, malicious actors today don't just start guessing random things. They start with dictionary-based attacks, and they start with, even more importantly, they start with compromised passwords often. And so if you have ever done yourself the favor or disservice, depending on which way you want to look at it, of looking yourself up in the Have I Been Pwned database, you'll find any case where your email address or your username and password that might be associated with your email address have been part of any massive data breaches. And these data breaches happen all the time, and some of them go back many years at this point. And so these are known passwords. The folks that Have I Been Pwned didn't release them. The folks that Have I Been Pwned are doing us a service by allowing us to check and see when our information has been compromised. But if your email address and password have ever been released in one of those breaches and disclosures, then malicious actors have that, and they can start guessing your known passwords first. Now, what brute force protection does is it allows the system to put a little slowdown in front of somebody. If they could just keep guessing, then they could guess hundreds, thousands, millions of passwords and bog your server down. With brute force protection, what happens is the firewall will lock out someone trying to guess multiple times. And so there's sort of a catch-22 here. If you forget your password and you guess too many times, guess what happens? You'll get locked out. So you want to have a better solution than just continuing to guess your password. Hopefully you're using a password manager and you don't have to guess your password anyway. But when local brute force is on, what's going to happen is the firewall on this site is going to prevent your website from being subjected to repeated password guesses. And so it's going to protect you from there. Now, what is network brute force and why do we recommend it? Network brute force is a threat intelligence system of sorts, right? So all the sites that have opted in and enrolled in network brute force will share information about attackers. So if we identify this one IP address from China, for example, that got locked out of your site, and you have signed in and opted in, that is, to network brute force, you've turned it on, then that IP address and that information is going to go to our network. And similarly, your site will get information about those bad actors and block them proactively, even if they haven't attacked your site. They attacked someone else's site in the network. So I encourage you to turn that on. We don't turn it on by default. And that is because we do have to send a little bit of data to Solid Security servers from your site. There's nothing in there that's personal about it. The IP address of those users that do get locked out do get sent, but we're not capturing any other tracking information or whatever. So, but because it is a little bit of data exchanging hands, we give you the opportunity to turn it on for yourself. And that is especially true in the case of Solid Security Basic. For plugins to be listed on the WordPress.org directory, those plugins have to comply with certain requirements, and user action is required for any data to be sent back to the plugin developer. So that's an example. And there's actually a question that the Solid Security Basic users get asked along the way during the setup process that our pro users do not get asked. It's for a similar reason. In that case, we just do the right thing for you automatically with pro. And in Basic, there's a user action required. You have to accept that. So we can talk about that more if you have a question about that a little bit later. But it will come up anyway. So I'll show it to you in just a few minutes. So anyway, that's what brute force is all about. We recommend you turn both of these on. That's the happy path. Turn them both on. The next thing is gets back to this question about guessable passwords. You don't want to use guessable passwords. If you can remember them, there's a really good chance that someone can guess them. So especially with the speed with which attackers are able to guess passwords today. So in addition to slowing them down from guessing at this site, we also want to give you a chance to allow you and your users, especially in administrative users, to be protected from using easily compromised, easily guessed passwords. So this is a security restriction related to the password itself. It is enabled by default in Solid Security Pro. We also refuse compromised passwords. And so the refusal of compromised passwords relates to have I been pwned, which is this concept I mentioned just a minute ago. If you have a user, or if you yourself are an administrator on your site and you sign in with an email address that has ever shown up in the have I been pwned database, this system will hash the password that you set up for your WordPress account and send that hash over to the Have I Been Pwned database and see if it matches any of the hashes that have been compromised in the past. And if so, it'll stop you from using that password, and it'll stop your users from using the password. And that is where I want to pause for just 1 second, because as you see, we have both of these turned on by default in Solid Security Pro and recommended. But there's a really important question right here. Which of your users will this apply to? We're going to require strong passwords. Will this be true for every user? And the answer is no. And that's why when we looked at our happy path, I had this question: for whom? This is a key question that is the source, I will say, the source of a lot of confusion about setting up the very, very, very configurable and flexible capabilities of Solid Security. And this is true for Basic and Pro, that your answer to questions like this one are really going to determine the user experience, but only for key users. And that's where we want to talk about to whom will this apply. And you'll see on the left, we're trying to animate it over here so you have some idea what's going to happen if you turn this off or on. You're going to see, what's going to happen with respect to these situations. So if password requirements are enabled, it's going to prevent you from using something that doesn't use a sufficient number of characters or complexity and that sort of stuff, different entropy levels, if you will. But this is where we answer the question for whom. Now, right now, you'll see it says editor capabilities and greater, which is our recommended choice. And if you tap that, you can see you have the ability to switch it to just those that have administrator capabilities on the site, or you can set it to everyone. And how you answer that question will depend on you and your site. So for example, if it's an e-commerce site and you want your users to be able to log in and just check their order status, but you don't allow them to store credit card information or anything super sensitive like that, then maybe you don't care quite as much about adding that level of friction to that user, so that like when they're creating their login for your site, they have to come up with a hyper complex password, or they can use, something simpler. You get to decide that at a moment like this. But how you answer the question for whom, I want to just quickly mention, you're probably familiar with the fact that WordPress has these default roles, and the 6 roles that are built into every single site are subscriber, viewer, contributor, author, editor, and administrator. So when you're looking at this configuration, you'll see that this says editor capabilities and greater. Notice it doesn't say editor role and greater. It says editor capabilities. And that's because many plugins and even some themes define other roles in WordPress. And so we want to apply these settings regardless of the user's role. And instead, we want to make sure that we apply the settings to anyone who's got a user account that could cause problems. So if I were to go add a new user right now, you can see that I get to choose the role. And in fact, on this site, I have another role or 2 that are not baked into the default WordPress install. And that's because in my AI questionnaire earlier, I said I might want to sell some merchandise, so it installed WooCommerce for me. And that means that I get a shop manager role and a customer role. And those are not built into every WordPress install. Those come with WooCommerce. And so a shop manager might be someone because they can change prices, let's say, or they can, update product information. You don't want their account getting compromised. And so the answer to the question, for whom do we want this to apply, is the way I think about this is a little bit like, if you think about access control in an office building, where maybe you had to pass through and swipe your badge just to get in the building, just to go through turnstile or security or whatever. But then you get in the elevator and there's another one of these. Have you ever seen this before? And that's because at the executive floor, somewhere up at the top where all the really important decisions get made, you can't get to that floor unless you're authorized, right? And so you might be able to get to the other floors without swiping your badge. But if you press the button for one of those other floors, you have to have had a badge that gets you there. And this is a little bit analogous to that. When we're setting up security in Solid Security for this purpose, maybe you don't care about the basics. If they can subscribe to your site, or if they can, maybe just register for a basic account, and maybe you have forums and they can, they can comment, or they can start forum posts or whatever. Maybe you don't care so much about the strength of their password. If they want to get their account compromised, that's up to them, right? But if that user has the ability to edit things on your site and change security settings or do administrative things, then you absolutely don't want them to be compromised. And so this question comes up more than once, and I want to bring it up here because we set this to editor capabilities and greater by default. That was a decision that we made. You can change it if you wish. You have these 3 choices, but if you follow the defaults, we're going to turn both of these things on, and we recommend that you set it for editor capabilities and greater because of the kinds of things that those users can do. I'm going to speed up just a little bit. The next thing we're going to talk about here is two-factor authentication. And you're familiar with this. When you sign into your bank's website, you might get texted. I hope not. I hope your bank has stopped using text messages. But you might get texted a code, and it'll say, enter the 6-digit code that we sent to your phone number. And of course, the purpose of this is to say that, well, security is about multiple layers. You have the thing that you know, and you have the thing that you have. The thing that you know, in the case of a login like this, might be the password. So you've identified yourself as you, either with your username, or with WordPress, you can also use your email address. So you've identified yourself as you, but then you've proven that you know the password, which we've now said is going to be a strong password. But are you really you or not? Is there something you have that we could use to add another layer of security that might prevent, say, somebody who got access to your LastPass vault, if you were still using LastPass? Hopefully you've moved to something else, but many of us had LastPass vaults and they got compromised, or whatever the situation might be. If somebody managed to figure out what your password is, by adding a second factor, it adds a layer of security. What kind of second factors do we support? Well, in Solid Security, we support a couple of different ways to address two-factor, but the one that I'm really most interested in for today's purposes is the Authenticator app. You've all seen this before, hopefully. If not, these are free apps. You can download one. Google makes one called the Google Authenticator. There's one called Authy. Different platforms have different versions of this. Usually what happens is you scan a QR code. That QR code shares a bit of secret information back and forth between your device and the site. And from there on out, your device can generate a 6-digit code that always matches the one that the site is expecting. In Solid Security Basic, you can enable two-factor. This is one of the differences between Basic and Pro. In Solid Security Pro, you can require two-factor. And because I'm showing you Solid Security Pro, you see that it is required, and that is an enabled setting. And we're going to require two-factor for whom? Editor capabilities and greater. This might be a really good place, even if you require your customers, if you have a WooCommerce shop, let's say, even if you require your customers to have a strong password, you may not want to require them to use a second factor. All right, that's asking a lot, and it creates a lot of friction for those folks. But again, for those top floors of your elevator, you want to protect those accounts, and so we do recommend setting up two-factor. Solid Security Pro offers a whole other layer that we don't address during this initial setup process, which has to do with passwordless login and the concept of passkeys. And Solid Security was the first WordPress plugin to support passkeys for WordPress, and it's still, in my opinion, the best implementation of passkeys. And so I actually prefer passkeys over even strong passwords and second factors. If you can use a passkey, there's another layer of security there that's available to you, and you can use passwordless authentication with it instead. If you're wondering, just to cover this one little bit, another thing that we do with two factors, we do give you some fallback codes, some backup codes that you can download, stash them somewhere important. So if for whatever reason you lose access to your device that has the two-factor authenticator app on it set up, you can temporarily use on a one-time basis one of the backup codes, and that'll get you back into your site if you ever get locked out. So if you have questions about login security or the brute force attacks and the firewall that we've covered so far, but be sure to drop them in the Q&A. And so we've got a question from Sherry about whether, as a Toolkit member, do you have PatchStack? The answer is not unless you purchased PatchStack separately. Now, in this case, we're talking about virtual patches from PatchStack. Every Solid Security user, basic or pro, gets access to vulnerability information, threat intelligence that comes from PatchStack. But in particular, usually when we're talking about PatchStack, we're talking about that amazing virtual patching service. And there's an add-on that you can purchase, Sherry, that will give you access to those. It's affordable. It's not expensive on a per site basis. And if you will remind me towards the end, I will get a link. I'll figure out a link for you that will get you a way that you can add that on for your site. And the other thing you can do is you can always contact our support team or our customer success team, and they'll be glad to hook you up as well. But I would love to help you before we finish today. So I think we've covered two-factor pretty well. And then you might be scared off by the fact that we have 5 steps down here. And the reality is that we've spent our time today on the most important stuff that we're going to dive into in any detail. But you'll now be presented with this question about whether you are building or setting up this site for yourself. It's your own site, it's your business, your organization, or if it's a client site. And this, again, gets back to the question about for whom. When you configure security parameters for your site, you have the opportunity to decide what happens based on not just on the WordPress role and the kind of privileges that user has based on their login, but also where they fit in the organization. If this is a client site, if you choose to answer this as a client site, then you'll have the opportunity to decide what access your clients have. And I think just for the purposes of today's demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and choose a client site so that you can see some of the questions that you'll get asked. Otherwise, you would not be asked these questions. Should your clients be able to view and make changes to Solid Security settings? And so this is where you get to decide. How well educated are these clients about security? Do you want them to be able to make changes if let's say they're an administrator, because sometimes we give client accounts administrator access, and sometimes that's a really good practice. But if they're an administrator and they then go in and make changes to Solid Security and say, well, I don't want to require two-factor for the administrators anymore, that's annoying me. Then, do you want them to have the power to do that? Yes or no? And so this is where you get to answer the question that, yes, I want to allow them to manage all of Solid Security, or no. We set this to no by default if you're setting this up for a client site. I'm going to leave it that way for the moment. And this, as you probably have figured out by now, this means that we also then have this one other layer. How do we tell the difference between a user that is a client versus an administrator user? Let's say we have my team. Let's say I run an agency and I have several staff members that are going to have logins to this site. And those are administrators. And then I've also got some folks on the client side that are administrators. How does Solid Security know the difference between the ones that are the administrators that should have access to Solid Security and those that are administrators that are from the client and they don't even need to be able to see where to go change those settings? Well, you are correct. There's going to be a place for us to address that here in just a minute. So then, oh, look at this. Which users are your clients? You can select them by name. Now, I've only got the one user account on this site. So this presumes that you've already either added those clients' user accounts to Solid Security. And if you haven't, don't worry about it. But if you've already added them, added their user accounts to the site, then you can go ahead and select them now. I'm not going to select anyone because I have no clients to configure it yet. So, oops, should not be fewer than one. Oh, it's going to complain. Oh, that's a fun little trick I've never run into before. Usually I set up a client account before I get this far in the demo. So I'm going to go back and say it's my own site, and we're going to skip that. So because I don't want to take time to go set up an account real quick. But we'll talk a little bit more. If you want to see that, we can show you a little bit of how we group those users together for the purposes of setting up and configuring the various specific security constrictions and permissions that those folks have. Now we're going to be at step 2, which has to do with what we call the global settings. Everything from here on out is something that you can do in Solid Security's settings area and features area, regardless of what you do right now. The earlier items are some special screens that we only show you during that initial setup process. You can configure them later, but we're only calling them out for you during the setup process. The next several steps here have to do with some things that we're going to show you currently. And we're currently considering whether to actually even just take these out so that we can shorten the entire setup process, because these are things you can always configure later. But here's an example of something that I mentioned earlier, that the Solid Security Basic folks have been asked a question that our Pro folks are not. Earlier on in the setup process, if you were installing Basic, you would have been asked a question about how we detect IPs. We recommend that you use what we call, it's actually got a pro name that's not listed here, but it's Security Check Pro, I think. In any case, we ask you that question during the basic onboarding because, as I mentioned earlier, we have to send a little bit of data from your site over to the Solid Security servers where they do some magic and then figure out what's the best configuration for your site. If you're using Cloudflare, if you're using any other kind of proxying or web application firewall or other solution that actually sits between your visitors and your website, those often will change how the website thinks about the IP address of the visitor. And here's how that could bite you. If someone tries to log in and fails from an IP address and you've got Cloudflare in front of your site, and then, 2, 3, 4 other people also try to log in and they get an error from attempting to log into your site, and the site thinks that the Cloudflare IP is the IP address that all those visitors are using rather than their home or business or Chinese or Russian IP address that they actually came in from, then that's going to confuse Solid Security's firewall, lock those IP addresses out, and that could mean that everybody is locked out of your site, including you. That would be bad. So how do we prevent that? Well, this system detects the correct configuration for your site, and we can't turn it on by default in Solid Security Basic. We do turn it on in Pro by default. But regardless of whether you're setting up Basic or Pro, when you get to this step, make sure it says Security Check Scan, because that will determine the correct configuration for your site. And to prove it to you, it will then give you a chance to see, is this IP that we've detected the one that matches your IP address that you're coming from right now? So you can always look that up with your ISP and see if that's correct. And if so, then you're good. And you can also authorize your IP, which means that in that situation where something goes awry, whether it's because, something like a WAF was in the middle or a proxy or whatever, or some other situation comes up, are there any IP addresses that you just don't want to ever get blocked? And if that's you and you're saying, yeah, I have a static IP, or my IP rarely changes, and I work from home, or I work from my office, or whatever that is, and I just don't want to ever get locked out, you can authorize your own IP. And this will effectively put you on an allow list or a whitelist so that you are not blocked. So that's what the screen does. And then we get into some features. Now, we've already enabled two-factor. Passwordless is enabled by default in Solid Security Pro. We also enable trusted devices. We recommend that you enable trusted devices, but we don't turn it on for you. And there are a few reasons why we don't turn it on for you. But a super quick explanation of this, and then I'm gonna do what I said earlier and speed up quite a bit. A quick explanation of this is you sign into your WordPress site. You've got the correct username and password. You're an administrator. You supply your 2FA code, your two-factor authentication code. You're coming from an authorized IP address. Do you want to be able to skip the two-factor as long as you've got the correct IP? And in other words, like, if we detect that you're still coming from the same computer, the laptop the same browser, same IP address, same, maybe we don't have to throw that two-factor roadblock in front of you every single time. So you get to check a box that says, yes, please trust this device. And that will allow us, the Solid Security plugin, to say, okay, as long as nothing changes too much about your login characteristics, we're not going to prompt you for that two-factor code. But behind that, we get to do a bunch of other really interesting stuff. And there's a whole other layer, which we won't get into in details today, but we have a fantastic webinar where this has been covered. Timothy, one of our lead developer for Solid Security, and I demonstrated how you can protect yourself from stolen session cookies using the trusted devices feature, which has to be enabled for that to work, and a couple of other details that you have to set up, including some geo IP stuff. There's other layers that you can set up, which will actually add a whole other layer of protection, so that if somebody managed to get malware on your machine, used an info stealer to get your session cookies. Session cookies are the real golden scenario for an attacker, because they don't need your password. They don't need your multi-factor authentication code. If they have a logged in session cookie from you, then they can just simply be logged in as you. Those cookies are invaluable for that purpose. But when you turn on trusted devices and finish configuring a few other things, you'll have the ability for Solid Security to detect when your session cookies are no longer actually on your machine and give you a way to authorize or not when someone is using those session cookies that belong only to you. So anyway, it gets a little more complex, but I just want to say there's some real power, and some research has indicated that as many as 60% of WordPress compromises come from stolen session cookies. And this is by far the gold standard solution. Configure trusted devices and those other items. And we can take questions about that later if you have them. But for now, it is not enabled. I will enable it at this point. So I'm gonna say next. And this is where we get to group users. Remember, like, which ones are the clients and which ones are the real, you know, the not the real ones. That was unfair. That was a Freudian slip on my part, probably. But if I say default, then you can see we have groups. And the default groups in Solid Security are actually named after the WordPress roles. Administrator, editor, author, contributor, subscriber, everybody else. If you had gone through the client path and you wanted to group your client administrator users into a separate category so that they either did or didn't have access to the Solid Security dashboard and configuration or whatever, then you get to deal with some other user groups. So user groups are not actually the same thing as the WordPress roles. But users that are, let's say, have the administrator role will by default land in the administrator user group in Solid Security. And again, this goes back to that for whom question. You can also set up other custom user groups. So if you want to set up a custom user group, you can create one, name it anything you'd like, and you can decide which types of roles get put in that user group, or you can actually select specific users and put them in that group. So you can carve users out and either make their permissions or capabilities either more restrictive or tighter security. You get a lot of flexibility there. There's a really, really powerful engine under the hood of Solid Security's user groups. It does tend to be a place where people can get confused, and so it's why I wanted to take just a moment and explain that. All right. We've got a great question about the setup process for Stellar Sites. Sherry, I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. I'm glad you asked. So we are now nearing the end of the setup process. This is just about like, who do we email from Solid Security when there are notifications related to security that need to get sent out? And so you get to define what email address these get sent from and who receives them. Either all administrators, you can then choose, and you may see some other default recipient options here depending on what plugins you have on your site. And you can just say, hey, only one user. In that case, this is me, so I might just check this. But for now, I'll just leave it the way it's set, and then we'll hit complete setup. Now, what Solid Security is going to do, it's going to actually apply all of those changes to your site right now, and you can see it's saving some changes. And remember at the beginning we had that vulnerability scan, if there were vulnerabilities that it had found, like, hey, you have a plugin that's got a 9.8 severity vulnerability, or whatever. If there were any high severity vulnerabilities, we would actually resurface them right here for you and show you, yes, you need to go take care of those. And we give you a link out to where you can go address them on your site itself. And so then from there, we can just go either to the Solid Security dashboard, which is what I'm going to show you real quick, or we can go dive into the Solid Security settings in a little bit more detail. I will just circle back to patch stack real quickly because we've had one question about it, and I mentioned briefly vpatching earlier, virtual patching earlier. Virtual patches are a fantastic tool that solve the problem of vulnerable software that you may not realize is vulnerable. Sometimes vulnerabilities get disclosed in the middle of the night on weekends. There's a kind of a joke around attackers hitting Christmas Eve or times when they expect that you're not paying close attention to your security. And so, and these days when vulnerabilities get disclosed, a lot of us are using open source software. That open source software releases an update and they'll say, hey, we fixed a bug. They don't even have to tell anybody what the bug is. Somebody will run a diff. They run a diff on the newly released version of the plugin, which compares it to the code in the previous released plugin. And they're able to see exactly what code changed, and they can reverse engineer. And hearing from the folks at PatchStack, it's not uncommon for that to be hours, like 4 hours later after a vulnerability is disclosed. They're seeing exploits in the wild where WordPress sites are being attacked to leverage that exploit. If that 4 hours happens after you went to bed, while you're on vacation, you didn't update your plugins yet or whatever, for all the reasons. Sometimes, plugin updates go wrong. If that happens, the virtual patch from PatchTech, if they have released one, and they don't release a virtual patch for every vulnerability, but if the vulnerability is high severity and it can be protected by a virtual patch, which is the case for many of the most severe vulnerabilities, they will virtually patch that software. What that means is, does it mean that they update the plugin? No. You still have the same plugin version you've always had. What changes is that they implement a very teeny tiny firewall rule, a surgical firewall rule using Solid Security's firewall, which prevents your site from being exploited. So even if someone knows you've got the vulnerability on this site and they know how to exploit it, the PatchStack virtual patch will prevent them from being able to exploit that vulnerability. And that gives you time to decide, am I going to patch it or not? Am I going to really update the plugin or not? Is this a plugin I want to remove from my site? You've got lots of choices about how you might want to mitigate the vulnerability, but it'll be mitigated in the meantime via the virtual patch. It's a fantastic solution, and it's included with every Solid Security Pro license. So I'm really excited to talk about that. We can answer more questions about that. And I mentioned earlier this concept of Solid Central. I didn't show the URL to Solid Central, but I saw someone dropped it in the chat. It's central.solidwp.com. If you have a SolidWP account, which means that you've either ever purchased something from us, or maybe you had an iThemes.com account before the rebrand from iThemes over to Solid Security. There is a way for you to sign up for a free Solid Security account. So what I'm about to tell you is kind of an interesting hack. Even if you don't have a Solid Security account yet, you can get one for free. Let me know in the ask in the Q&A and I'll share a link with you about how you can go set up a free Solid Security account. It doesn't give you access to any of our premium products, but what it does do is it gives you access to a basic version of Solid Central. And so even if you're not paying for Solid Security Pro, you can install Solid Security Basic on as many sites as you want. It's available in the WordPress.org directory. You can configure it to protect those sites. You can also connect those sites to Solid Central for free. Now, you won't have access to some of Central's pro features like uptime monitoring, for example, or white labeled reports and scheduled reports and some other sort of like pro level features that are available to Solid Central Pro users, but you can absolutely connect those sites to Solid Central. And if you drop into the vulnerability screen here, this will aggregate the vulnerable software data from all of your connected sites running Solid Security, and it will surface the information all in one nice place here. I do often have a demo account, and I'm not using it today because I'm using the Stellar Sites demo, where I've got some vulnerable software so that you can see. I can show you what it looks like on a single site, but the beauty of this from the standpoint of Solid Security and Solid Central is that this vulnerability screen that I'm going to show you right now, which again would list vulnerable software if it had been found on this site, the vulnerabilities that might be discovered during the site scans will just show up for this site here because I'm logged into just the WP admin for this site. But for all my connected sites, those vulnerabilities will be listed over here, and I can take action on them. So maybe I want to update them across all of the sites. Maybe there's a plugin I like to use and I've got it on 50 sites, 100 sites. I can decide, is that something I want to update on all of them? Yes. Okay, good. I can bulk update them with one click. So I don't have to go sign into every single site or use some other solution to try to update that plugin. Or if I say, no, I'm done with this plugin, it's the last time, they've had too many vulnerabilities, or I don't even need it, I don't even know what it's here for, and I've got it on 10 sites or whatever, I can just deactivate it and remove it from all those sites all at once. So you get some sort of bulk management options that are really fantastic in Solid Central. It's got a lot of other capabilities. That's not why we're here today, but I just wanted to point it out to you real quickly. And let's go back to the Site Assist real quickly. And so you should start to see that if I look, oh, look at this, site security setup, I've hit 5 out of 5. So one was already done for me. If you might recall, the plugin was installed. I have done the setup process, and I have configured all three of the recommended options that are listed in the Site Assist as recommended. And the Stellar Sites team, the Cadence team, and the Solid Security team work together to determine like what is it we really wanted to surface. And so when you're setting up a new site from the Stellar Sites system, these are the things we're going to recommend. And there are so many other capabilities of Solid Security and Solid Security Pro that we won't have time. We wouldn't have time, no matter how many hours we set aside today to talk about them. So real quickly, what are some of the differences? We've talked about a few of them. Basic is a fully featured firewall solution, gives you great login security tools and all of the essentials really that you need to protect your site, including allowing you to enable two-factor for those users that you want to enable it for. If you want to require two-factor, if you want to require that your users have certain other login security measures in place, then that's where Solid Security Pro might start to make sense. And so just for simplicity's sake here, I can bring up the solidwp.com/security page, and you can see. So you get to customize login security for if you're a pro site. Brute force protection, as we mentioned, is available in both, but you have some expanded capabilities. Two-factor authentication, passkeys. Requiring two-factor, the two-factor is available in Basic and Pro. Requiring it is only available in Solid Security Pro. And so if you want to require that your admin users, let's say, or whatever group use two-factor, then you're going to want Solid Security Pro to do that. Passkeys are only available in Solid Security Pro. And the patch stack integration, the virtual patching solution, like what we were just talking about, with protecting you from vulnerabilities day or night, 24/7, 365, those are a Solid Security Pro feature. And there are other things that you can do with Solid Security Pro, but those are the sort of key ones that I wanted to call out real quickly, and happy to answer further questions about that. And in just a second, we're going to get to Q&A. And so I do see we have some others that have lined up. I appreciate that. I'll just take a moment and mention, if you're interested in learning more about Stellar Sites, this week's usual Solid Academy premium office hours that Nathan Ingram hosts on Thursdays is postponed till the following week. And instead, what I'm going to do on Thursday, and this is wide open, you don't have to be a paid member or even a subscriber to Solid Academy to join. This is wide open. Just go to academy.solidwp.com. You can register at 1 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to do a full demonstration of Stellar Sites. We've been having a lot of folks asking about how it works. And so I'm going to show you some of the amazing tools that went into building very quickly, I should say, that site that we've been using today in our demonstration. So I'd love to have you join me and bring your questions about Stellar Sites. I can't wait to show you what all it does. And you've already seen a little bit. You got a sneak peek today of some of it, and the fact that it's tightly integrated with some Solid products, including Solid Central and Solid Security. So as you might imagine, it's also integrated with some other Solid tools. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And I will mention as well, if you are here today and you're like, hey, I don't want to wait for Stellar Sites. Actually, you don't have to wait for Stellar Sites. You can use it today. You can buy it today. But I'm not really in the market for, a solutions-based hosting program. All I really want is Solid Security Pro. Then I invite you to take advantage of a 25% offer. This is just for attendees of this event. It expires on May 2nd. So as of today, if you use Security Clinic 25, and I will drop that in the chat real quickly, the Security Clinic 25 will get you 25% off any new Solid Security Pro purchase. And so just want to mention that. You can go to solidwp.com/security to take advantage of that offer. And I appreciate you being here today. I will also do Q&A. I don't know there we go. I don't know. There was a slide. I think that was supposed to be back to Q&A, but here it is. Okay. So let's talk about questions. And let's take a look and see what you've asked. If you have a question and you haven't dropped it in the Q&A box yet, please do so. Where do you add on Solid Security's patch stack solution for subscribers? If anyone is wondering why Sherry's asking about adding it on, If you buy a new Solid Security Pro subscription, you get virtual patching from PatchStack included as part of the deal. Prior to rebranding from iTheme Security to Solid Security, we had a lot of customers that had the iTheme Security Pro product, and they got Solid Security Pro, all of the features that we provide at no additional cost. They continue to be able to have access to Pro. But because the PatchStack solution is something we pay a third party for, and none of that was envisioned back when those earlier subscriptions were created, and they weren't incorporated into that virtual patching solution was never a part of the iTheme security solution, only the Solid Security Pro solution after the rebrand. We did find a way to give anyone who had a legacy subscription, an older subscription to iTheme security, which Sherry has, a way to add virtual patching on inexpensively on a per site basis. And you can buy 1 site, 5 site, 10 site, whatever you need. So Sherry, I'll get you a link in just a few minutes. We have with the setup process, if we have stellar sites, what's the best time to prepare Solid Security Pro? After we've loaded the start site and are building out the site, or can we do some settings prior to this in the starter site? So I'm going to recommend that you do it right away. Set up Solid Security right away. At what point would it be a problem if that site got hacked? I think that's the best way to answer that question. So for most of us, I think the answer is probably going to be, it would be a problem right from the beginning. Like I don't want hackers getting in, especially if they get in without me realizing it. Maybe they create an admin account and I don't happen to notice it, and they get in and start tinkering or whatever. Like you really do want to protect the site right away. Now I will mention, Solid Security Pro is installed and virtual patching is enabled right away, and it's going to scan twice a day for vulnerable software, no matter what. So some of it's kind of already done for you, but I would recommend that you go ahead and think through the security model and configuration and settings for your site right away. And then that way, later when you add a user and they're a client and you make them an admin user or whatever, they'll already be, their account will have the roles and permissions already defined. You can always go back and review, change those settings as you need to, as you wish, but I would do it right away. That would be me. And if you have any follow-up to that, let me know. Gene, is there a way to allow only me as an admin user to manage Solid Security and not other admin users? The answer is yes. You create a user group in Solid Security, and this is one that would be created by default. If I had a client user and answered that question, that they should or shouldn't be able to administer Solid Security, it would have set up a group called security managers. And you don't have to have the plugin do that. It would do it for you automatically. But if you go to your settings and your user groups, you can create a user account or a user group. And you could do this one of two ways, right? You could set up one group that's like super admins, put yourself in it, and give that user group only this privilege right here, manage Solid Security. Or you could set up a group for the others and make sure that setting is turned off. So it just depends on which way you want to organize it, but you could absolutely make sure that you are the only administrative user that has the ability to manage Solid Security. Just don't ever get locked out of your site. Actually, if you get locked out and you're in the Stellar Sites universe, or if you're a Solid Central user, we have ways to release lockouts and stuff that will help you. So I don't want to scare you too much, but yeah, do just make sure that you have access to 2FA codes and whatever else you may have set up, because that could put you in a little bit of a box. Let's see. I have Solid Security class asks, I have Solid Security set up on my starter site. When it's cloned, which settings should be updated or customized for the individual site? Same if I export settings and import on another existing site. So this is a great question, and I realize now that the earlier question from Sherry mentioned starter sites, and I think I transliterated that in my brain to stellar sites. So I apologize. I saw that ST followed by the word sites. And so you're talking about a starter site, meaning something that you set up, maybe you update it once a year or whatever, but you have a configuration that this is just your out of the box. This is the way WordPress is going to be configured for me. And so all I have to do is clone it to a new, hosting environment, change the domain, search and replace on the database, and now I've got a new site with a different domain, and it's all set up. And yeah, you've got to handle the licensing to make sure that the new URL is properly licensed or whatever, but all your configuration is there. And so I may have answered Sherry's question slightly off base, and I apologize, Sherry. But getting to the question that class asks, which settings should be updated or customized if you have cloned a site? Well, and you mentioned exporting and importing. That's another great feature of Solid Security Pro is that you can import and export your settings. So if you get a site configured the way you like it, you can export those settings and then import it into another site, and boom, your configuration is good. Anything that involves specific users is an area where I would want to pay attention. So in other words, you saw that I could apply my settings to entire roles or groups at a time. Like for example, I want to require 2FA for anybody that's an editor or above. But you can see by using user group configurations that I can define groups and add specific users to specific groups, and then make changes that might apply to a specific user by virtue of their user account having been added to a group, rather than the role that their user account belongs to being included within a group. I hope that makes sense. So anything that affects specific users, that's something that you're going to want to pay attention to. The licensing is another consideration, which I just hinted at a moment ago. You want to make sure that licensing is set up correctly, so that you continue to get the benefits of the Solid Security Pro license properly being attached to the site. Off the top of my head, what other things that might be site specific? Some things that are going to be kind of obvious, like if the site that you just set up is a site for a client, versus whether it's a site for you, and your team to use, that might be an area. So maybe you want to adjust some settings related to whether or not it's a client site, depending on how you configured Solid Security in your starter site that you then cloned, or the setup that you exported and then subsequently imported. I think those are the key areas I would pay attention to. A lot of the way that you configure Solid Security is probably going to be based on your philosophy. And so as long as you're philosophically still aligned with yourself, I think that you'll probably be in good shape to not worry too much about anything that isn't in the category of the licensing and the user specific and sort of client versus not client site kind of realm. So I hope that helps. Nothing else is really coming to mind off the top of my head. Another question here regarding patch stack as an add-on. This is from Gene for a toolkit. This process and implementation is awkward and difficult to navigate and manage. Is there no way to manage the licenses within SolidWP admin? I've had several support tickets. I will say, Gene, I appreciate this question, and I agree with you. It is a little clunky. The way that those get managed, we did change, and it was a change that a lot of users and I think you're going to be in that group, find the change to be not ideal. The reason that we made the change, we used to allow. Let me talk about the changes. We used to allow you to configure which of your Solid Security Pro sites patch stack was licensed for and which ones it wasn't, right from inside WP admin. The reason that we changed that is because there was no good way to prevent a client who might log into their site that you run for them, and maybe they're licensing for Solid Security Pro and patch stack are passing through you. There would be no way for that client to be prevented from then seeing all of the other domains that are also licensed via your account. We had some users very upset about that. We do not want them. And so our workaround for that initially was, well, attach them to Solid Central, and in Solid Central, you can get very specific about controlling what different users see in WP admin. We give you a lot of tools to do that in Solid Central. But that was also a very clunky process, and because they had so many sites, and the vast majority were client sites, it was going to take them many, many hours to set it up. And so the decision that got made was to just simply hide that from WP admin and allow you to continue to manage your solid your patch stack licensing, with a centralized tool, which in this case is my.solidwp.com. And so Yeah, I agree. It's not my favorite way to do it either. But we have this tension between different users who wanted it a certain way and others. And so what I recommend is if you haven't already submitted a feature request for this, it sounds like you've got some tickets about it. So hopefully a feature request, sorry, has been submitted somewhere along the line. But if not, let's get a feature request in, because if we get enough votes to change it, then we may be able to find a better solution for it all. And there are some potential changes coming to how licensing gets managed for SolidWP as a whole and for all of Solid products. And so there's some decisions that are being weighed, and I am actually no longer the product manager, product owner for SolidWP, and that's a change that we haven't formally announced just yet. But my colleague Dave Green is in that chair now, and I know he would want to hear from you about how you would prefer that it happen. So we definitely want to encourage you to submit a feature request if you haven't. And and for anyone who might also have that request, you can go vote on an existing feature request, and that'll help get some attention to it. Gene also asks, in user groups, why on some sites are there more user profiles than the default? Am I the only one that has access to the sites and did not add the user? Oh, okay, yeah, you mentioned security managers and clients. So security managers and clients are default groups, but only if you answer the preceding questions in that setup process in the right in the way that would cause them to be included. So for example, we won't set up a default group called clients if you said this is for you, your site is for you, and not for clients. The only reason we would set up that group that's called clients is if you said, oh yes, this is a client website and I want to put my clients in that group. And then in that case, if you say set up the default groups, one of the defaults will be clients. Similarly, security managers is the exact same situation where you say, hey, it's a site for clients, and I don't want clients to be able to manage security, or I do want them to be able to manage security. So I think I always have to stop and think about that. But I think that if you say it's a client site and I do want clients to be able to manage security, then I think we set up both a client's user group and a security managers group. But in any case, those are just there as a courtesy, as a convenience. Like the setup process is trying to be smart and set up the groups that it thinks you're going to need based on how you've answered the earlier questions. You can always go in, as you saw, and add other groups and configure them how you want. So if you have a site where you're like, why doesn't this one have the security managers group? I want that. Just go create it. It's easy. Or you can use, if you're using Pro, you can export your settings and import them, and that might also help you. So I hope that answers that question. Those are all the questions we have right now that we've received. So I hope that means that everybody's curiosities are satisfied. To this point. And Sherry, you're the exception, because I know you're asking about how to add patch stack on. And I will see if I can find that. Can a user group be deleted? I just saw this in the chat. The answer is yes. Just keep in mind that if you delete a user group, then any settings specific to that group may disappear, which actually brings up an interesting point. These are cascading permissions and restrictions. So it's entirely possible for any particular user to be in more than one user group, because as you can see, I can add them by username to a specific group. And sometimes users' roles change, and for various reasons, depending on how the site was configured the day that someone initially set up a given user group, that user might persist in a user group even though their role changed, let's say. And so it's possible for someone to be in more than one user group, and so what happens is that if it's a permission, then that applies to one group and not another, then we're going to apply that permission to the user regardless of what other groups they're in, right? And like if we require two-factor for this special group that we set up called Super Duper Administrators, but that person is also in the Shop Manager group, and the Shop Manager group doesn't have 2FA required, well, then that user, because they're in both, they're going to get the more restrictive version. We're going to require them to have 2FA set up for their account. So it's probably kind of intuitive, but if you haven't ever been in the situation where you saw, hey, somebody's in more than one group, what happens if I remove them from that group or delete the group or whatever. Like you just want to maybe take a look and make sure that you're aware of the implications, the security implications of deleting the group before you proceed. You don't want to end up with someone either having too few permissions or too loose a security posture based on what they're capable of doing on your site. So that's another piece of that. So in any case, we are well over time. I think we're going to call it now. Sure, Gene, you're welcome. I appreciate you asking the question. Sherry, I am going to find you that answer. It may take a moment for me to track it down. There's a URL I know that I could send you to that will allow you to add PatchStack on. And off the top of my head, I don't remember what it is. So I might take just a quick moment and see if I can find it. And if I can't, then I've got your name here and we'll drop you an email. We'll get you that out via email. So you're welcome to email me if you don't hear from me for some reason. Not that I've ever forgotten to do something, but if you don't hear from me for whatever reason, you're welcome to drop me an email, david@solidwp.com, or of course you can hit up our support team or customer success team. They'll help you. But yeah, I'm not gonna try to track it down right now because it's gonna take a minute. But Sherry, I will email you after the event, and making myself a note, and we'll get you that link to how to get yourself a PatchStack add-on. So thanks again for being here today. I appreciate it on everyone's behalf. And we're delighted that you're here. I hope you'll join me for the setup clinic. Sorry, not the setup clinic. That's what we just did. I hope you'll join me for the Stellar Sites demo this Thursday. Again, you can find that at academy.solidwp.com. And just look at the upcoming live streams, and it's wide open, free to register. And anybody that you know that might be interested in learning more about Stellar Sites, we're going to demo it all the way through, show you what that's all about and how to use it. And we'll look forward to seeing you then. And I was just checking to see if there are any new questions in the Q&A, and there are not. So thanks for being here. And this recording will be posted. It may take a little longer than usual because I will be quite frank with you. I'm not familiar with the process of posting the recording, but I will get the answer to that process, and we'll get this recording posted for anyone who wants to go back and catch the replay. And once again, thanks for being here, and we will see you next time.